We are here. It is March 18th, 2023. That year confounds me. Because I remember when I was a kid, because we didn't have an abacus, we had calculators. And I remember putting in years that seemed like it was so far in the future. The year 2000, sweetheart, I'm going to have to tell you about Y2K. And how we thought the whole world was going in on January 1st, 2000, and then you would buy all these things that were Y2K compliant. Do you remember that? That sounds like that was so long ago, but it was almost 25 years ago. That's crazy, but we're here. So for those of you who are watching virtually, everybody wave and say hello, put your hands up. Right? And those of you who are in the space, thank you for taking time out of your Saturday to spend with me, where I can talk to you about this scoundrel of a man named Ike Rogers, okay? Before I get started, there are a few people I need to thank. Definitely Donna and Cherokee Nation for bringing me out and giving me the opportunity to share my family story, which is really a Freedman story, and it's a Cherokee story. I also have to thank my grandmother, for the years she spent here in Vinita, growing up in Vinita. All the people in Kansas City, Kansas, that, again, you'll hear me bring that out a lot, because if folks didn't stay here, where'd they go? Right. If I was in a different room, people would not even be able to answer that question. We know, because we know where our folks are, right? So I definitely want to say that. As well, I want to thank my family that's in the room, my cousin Sheila, my cousin Tracy, as well as a dear friend of mine, Angela Walton Raji. When I first came across the information that I'm going to talk to you guys about, she really was the one that directed me in the right direction. She really gave me a solid foundation and grounding, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to share with you. She's who I call. I was texting her last night after we went to Fort Smith, which we're going to talk about Fort Smith in a little bit. But definitely want to say thank you to her, Terry Ligon, as well as my folks who are in the Oklahoma Freedmen Collective. Those are all individuals from the 5 tribes whose ancestors were freedmen, and we are focused on sharing the family history and the history of freedmen, because too many folks get too focused on, you're just forgetting that the stories are there. And I personally, and I know I'm a little biased, we have the best genealogy research, period, in the country right here. I don't know if you all know that, but we do. So let's get started. We're going to start with finding Isaac Rogers, then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go into researching not just freedmen, but we're going to talk about researching Black folks in the state of Oklahoma. Who's read a Dawes application? Anybody read that? Oh, well, if you didn't, you're going to read one today. Here's your first opportunity to do so. So we're going to talk about that, the whole term state Negroes. That sounds like, what is that? What's a state Negro? Those are people who weren't a part of the 5 tribes who came in and established Black towns, right? That's what we know Oklahoma for, is having the largest amount of Black towns in the nation. So we're going to spend time talking about that. And then we're going to end talking about my favorite regiment of the United States Colored Troops, the 1st Kansas. And if you watched the movie Glory and you saw Denzel with the one tear coming down his face, and we got Morgan Freeman and Matthew Broderick, we got all the drama, that was nice. But in my opinion, that should have been the 1st Kansas, because that literally was them. They were the first. And a big chunk of the people who were part of that regiment were freedmen of the 5 tribes. And nobody is giving our people their due. And because they're not, we have to give them their due. Okay? So I gave you the whole plethora. You have the buffet. All right, let's start with Ike Rogers. Now, if you're anywhere squeamish, you don't like looking at the body during the viewing, turn your head for a second. Okay? Some people don't like that part. They'll stay at the back. Okay? But how did I get introduced to Ike Rogers? Well, let's go back. Ooh, I need to learn how to work this thing. There we go. Dead man in a book. Picture this. It's about 1999. I'm 3 years old. I'm kidding. I'm not. But I'm in the garage of my parents' house. And me and my dad are going through a number of boxes. We're looking at a whole bunch of stuff. And we're unearthing all these family things. Now, one thing you have to remember about my family is that by the time I was 22 years of age, my father, my aunt, my only first cousin, and both of my grandparents had died. So outside of my siblings and the 2 children that my first cousin had, that was it, okay? So when you have a series of deaths, my first cousin dies in 85, my grandfather dies in 94, my grandmother dies in 98, my aunt dies in 99, where does all their stuff go? It ends up being passed to the remaining person who was in the family, which just so happened to be my father. And we are finding all kinds of stuff in these boxes. Because my cousin was killed in a car accident, he was killed by a drunk driver at 24 years of age, it really traumatized my family. And my grandparents could not bear to stay in their house. They packed the boxes, they moved into a condo, and so those boxes were never unpacked. So when me and my father were going through them in 1999, all the newspapers were dated with the year 1985. They had never even opened them. And within those boxes was a book that had no cover on it. Cover had been torn off. It was yellowed. I didn't know what it was. So I started flipping through, and there was a stamp. My grandfather collected stamps. There's a stamp affixed to a piece of cardboard. This is totally peak my grandmother. She had bunions, and she would cut the shoe, cut the cad to make room for her bunions. It would make sense that she would have this makeshift bookmark in this book. But it was marking this page of this dead man. And my father told me at the time that we were related to this man, but I was 19. We were pop locking and dropping it. Like, we were not doing anything with regard to family history, genealogy research. Like, I knew I was related to him, but that was it. And so what happened is that my grandmother, she passed, my aunt died, and my father was gone within 2 years. So that's my grandmother. That's Lois, looking like she's about to go sing a song. I don't even know if my grandmother could sing. That's a great question. I'm going to have to ask somebody. Great eyebrows. All the granddaughters look a lot like her, ironically. But it was a bunch of funerals, okay? And what I had to rely on was what was in those boxes and what my father told me, until I moved beyond what I knew and what was in front of me. And what I discovered is that the book that had the dead photo of Ike and that had the cover ripped off was called Hell on the Border. And it was about this hanging judge in Fort Smith, Arkansas, named Isaac Parker. Okay? That's interesting. And it had a whole detail of all these people he hanged and the gallows and all this other stuff. And I was like, I just do not understand my connection to these people. I knew my grandmother's maiden name was Rogers, and she was born in Oklahoma. But beyond that, not much else. So as I started to even ask my mom, because she, as much as she doesn't think she is totally a family historian. She's the keeper of the stories. She's the one that's, well, you know, right? You know, the stuff not everybody's talking about where you want to have the context and the history, right? Some people may not tell you that. My mom remembered a lot, and I started to reach out to my cousins in Kansas City, right? They started giving me stories, and we didn't have the Native American princess. We had a teacher that was living in the Indian Territory. We didn't know her name, but we had her information. And then I started Googling, who is Ike Rogers? Who is this man? Why is he dead in a book? Like, why was his death, so important that they would put this picture in a book about a hanging judge? What's going on with that? So time went on. Again, I started going with the information that I knew, and I knew Aunt Edna, okay? Who has got that matriarch in your family that knows what everybody is doing? Maybe you are the matriarch that knows who is where, what they're doing, what they don't have no business doing, right? That was my Aunt Edna. That was my grandmother's older sister. And I knew that there was oral history that Aunt Edna had land in Oklahoma. See, we went to Kansas City first, but after you leave Kansas City, let's say you don't stay in Kansas City, Missouri. Let's say you don't stay in Kansas City, Kansas. Where's the next place our people go? Oh my God. They said it right, Chicago. You're correct. That's exactly what happened. Now, if you don't stay in Chicago, or if you chose not to go to Chicago, where would you go if you were on the West Coast? Oakland, LA. Again, you all, this is not just your family. You're answering the questions for mine too, because we all go to the same places. So Aunt Edna left first. She went to school in Quindaro, Kansas. She went to Western University. It was a historically black college. Aunt Edna graduated. She got married. Then she moved to Chicago. My grandmother followed her. She met my grandfather. Then Aunt Edna moved to LA because Uncle Claude was living in LA. And then she became the family matriarch. And so she maintained this land. That's all we knew. She had land. And when I started searching, I found her and an aunt I had never heard of on a newborn Dawes card. That's what you're looking at. This is what entitled my aunt to their land because they were citizens of the Cherokee Nation. Have you guys ever seen one of these before? Only a couple in the room? Oh, well, we got to get you guys indoctrinated. Okay? So on this card, you see the amount of genealogy information on it. You have the child's name, their age as of a certain date, whether there's a blood quantum, that's loaded on that line with that line through it, right? Father's name, father's roll number, name of mother, mother's roll number. So if the mother was a citizen or the father was a citizen, you could delineate the date they were born. Then the father's card, so you can go back to the father's card and get more information about their parents. When the application was received, when the citizenship certificate was issued, all of this is on this one card. Do you all understand? There are scores of people whose families did not come from this area that spend years trying to find information just like this, and we got cards with it on there. We take it for granted. We think, oh, everybody, no, they do not. So that's actually a picture of Aunt Edna and Uncle Clarence. And, or I'm saying uncle, aunt. Because she was a girl named Clarence. Tuck that in your pocket, because the name Clarence is going to come back a little bit later, okay? So Aunt Edna held on to her land. That's her as a grown woman. She dies in 1985. The same year my cousin was killed by a drunk driver, my grandmother lost her sister, her oldest sister, the family matriarch. And remember, we're passing those boxes down. So in addition to that Hell on the Border book, my aunt had a letter from the Cherokee Nation. And it was from the registration office. And what it told her was that as an interested Cherokee, she would have to reapply for her citizenship. I just showed you her Dawes card that has a roll number, that has a citizenship certificate issued, but she voted in elections. She was an at-large citizen in California. She paid the taxes on her land allotment here, but when we get to the late 70s, our principal chief and several other people, through a series of actions, disenrolled the freedmen. So she held on to this letter that the postmark is just a month or so before I turned a year old. And she kept that letter. And then when she died, that letter went to my grandmother. And when my grandmother died, that letter went to my father. When my father died, it came to me. And there's a note on the front of it that says, important, take care of this, write a letter. So that's how I get in this room. Okay? So back to Ike. This is my grandmother with her two brothers. There were, let's see, Edna, Clarence, my grandmother, Uncle Wilbur, Uncle Ted. Aren't they just fine? Now, of course, we know where this picture is taken. Kansas City, Kansas, right? So at this point, I went online and I started to look for more information. And thankfully, what I discovered, there we go. We have these old message boards where people would put up queries and they'd ask questions about folks. And one of the things that I did was I learned about a website called Afrogenius.com. And Afrogenius is one of the early places that we had to learn about researching African American genealogy. We could go and ask any question. There were folks who were experts. We even had a little lunchtime chat that we would have that you could bounce questions. But not only was that there, they had a board that was specific for people researching the 5 tribes and freedmen. Well before their time, okay? And some of those folks on the website that helped me were Miss Angela, I talked about. She is a Choctaw Freedman. Terry Ligon is a Chickasaw Freedman. In fact, his great-grandmother was a part of Equity Case 7071, where Chickasaw Freedmen sued the Dawes Commission to be added to the by-blood roll because they had a degree of Indian blood that was not documented on the Dawes rolls, okay? And then Mr. Bernie McRae, he had a bunch of incredible resources as well. This picture, I've learned, is the only photo of Ike Rogers that's not associated with him capturing Cherokee Bill. I did not know that until someone told me, and I said, well, it's just sitting in the basement in Kansas City. No one knew it was there. So, as I continued my process looking, I came across this picture. Anybody ever been to Fort Smith? Into the National Park Service? Okay, we just went there yesterday. When you go up into the new jail, up the stairs, this photo is about 30 feet on the wall. And it's the day that an Indian outlaw named Cherokee Bill, right there in the center, was captured finally after he had been murdering and robbing people and doing all kinds of crazy stuff in the Indian Territory. He was captured, and when they delivered him in Wagoner to be taken to Fort Smith, a photographer came out and took a picture. And that was in 1895. And Ike Rogers is in this photo. Okay. We've got Zeke and Dick Crittenden here at number 4 and number 5. Number 2 was Clint Scales, who was another Cherokee freedman. Me and my cousin were asking, these 2 little boys, what was they doing out here? Right? Bad, right? And then the fact that it was like, I'm not gonna miss the picture. Like, that's literally what it is, like, on both sides. And you know, you had to be perfect because the exposure times were long back then. You had to wait a long time for the picture to be exposed. So they literally, I want to know where their mamas were and did they get in trouble? Because once this hit the newspaper, you can't hide that you missed school that day, right? It's right there. So here's where it gets really interesting because Ike Rogers was a Civil War veteran, okay? The oral history in our family, he was a U.S. Deputy Marshal. What's that? I didn't know what that was, right? Oh, he's a Cherokee. Okay. But Angela helped me connect the fact that Ike was a part of the 1st Kansas, which became the U.S. Colored Troops 79th Regiment. What you're looking at is the descriptive information that was taken when he enlisted. What does his birthplace say? Cherokee Nation. Okay. They fudged his age a little bit. He was about 15, 16, right? He wasn't 18. No, he wasn't. 5'5". I'm like, you're a little short, but that's okay. Depends on who you ask. And they give his respective characteristics. And the 1st Kansas is important. We're going to spend some time later talking about this. But he was in Company E. He was a private. And I ordered his pension file. Anybody that knows anyone that had service, right, in our military, you hear people say, I'm on 25% disability, I'm on 50% disability. Well, when people served in the Civil War, they also were able to claim a pension. And that's where we get a lot of rich genealogical information, especially about those who were formerly enslaved. See, we here in the Cherokee Nation, we are lucky. We don't have to go looking in 75 places for who our slaveholders are because they're on the Dawes cards of our ancestors. But as I mentioned a couple days ago, for me, if you consider each of my appendages to be one of my grandparents, 2 of my legs are from Louisiana. 1 arm is from Oklahoma, the other one is from Arkansas. That means that for my 2 legs and 1 of my arms, I literally have to try to find as many clues as possible as to figuring out my ancestors' story while they were enslaved. because it's not just go on slavery.com and put in the name and it's there. That's not how it works. Enslaved people were property, which means that you have to look in property records and you have to research the slave owner. But what if you don't know the name of the person? For freedmen, it literally is as easy as finding a Dawes enrollee. Okay? So with researching most African American genealogy, Civil War pensions is the way that people find out who their slave owners were. Because their names are mentioned, because you have to give context. How is the person that we think is a veteran, how do we know it's that person? They interview people. They'll say, I knew Isaac Rogers. His slaveholder was named Elzira May. He lived in the Cherokee Nation. You're literally reading testimony from people. So when I ordered Ike's file, I thought he only had one wife. Oh no, this is where the story gets really interesting. No. He married two different women named Sarah. One was named Sarah Van, one was named Sarah Fry. And then when Sarah Van died, he married Sarah's sister Ruth. And Ruth dropped dead, and then that's when he married Sarah Fry. But then later we find out about the other wives. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I discovered, right, I through oral history and through just everything that my family had told me, I knew my grandfather was named Theodore Cooey Van Rogers. We called him Cooey. Why does he have that name? I find out that's the name of a district in the Cherokee Nation, is Cooey. Did not know. There was Uncle Nelson. There was Aunt Ethel Jane, Uncle Roy, who is Sheila's grandfather, and Uncle Raymond. All these details are in the file because his minor children were getting pensions until they were 16. So that's how I find out who all the kids are. But then there was this woman in the file named Martha Richardson. This lady knew everything about Ike. She was there when the kids were born. She was talking about the time and the date, and she remembered this. I said, who is this lady? She just is kind of all over. Like, how does she know all these details? It took me years to find out that that was his mother. She never said it, and I think she probably didn't mention it because she didn't want it to influence the pension examiner into thinking that she was biased in favor of her son. So she just came as a witness. But the other thing you have to remember is that if you look at when this affidavit was taken in 1897, we are sort of in the beginning of the throes of the Dawes Commission. And people's statements and character and things were constantly being questioned. It's the same reason why my grandmother's delayed birth certificate for the state of Oklahoma does not have a race. She left it blank. It was a choice. Okay? So that's Grandpa Cooey and Uncle Wilbur and Uncle Ted on the farm in Vinita. So as I kept digging through this, I discovered the history of our nation and slavery. And for a long time, I did not come back to this because I could not understand that what I learned in school around the Trail of Tears, nobody ever told me slaves walked it. I could not understand how our people have been marginalized through crazy and ridiculous treaties with the US government, and yet we marginalized a whole segment of our population. In my mind, I could not wrap my mind around it. And a lot of people that encounter their family history as connected with freedmen of any of the 5 tribes are going to have the same conflict I had, especially if the citizenship aspect of things is in limbo. Because it's not just your individual family story. This entire thing is extremely emotional on all aspects. And I was pissed. I was mad. What do you mean? We have a separate designation from everybody else. Why are we on separate cards? Why are the cards not the same, right? But you got to look at what was going on with Henry Dawes and that old Tams Bixby. His name just sounds like he was messy. And I don't even like reading it in the Dawes applications. There's a whole town in Oklahoma. I'm sorry, Bixby, Oklahoma. But you're named after Tams Bixby, who was part of the Dawes Commission, okay? And so What I discovered, again, is that in having the Dawes cards, in having the applications of several family members, I was able to reconstruct our family tree in ways that I have not been able to do on the other side of my family, just because the information is so rich for our people. And going through the applications, I found out there were more kids. I thought it was just us. Well, no. It wasn't just us. So the first card you saw was Aunt Edna and Aunt Clarence's newborn or, minor Cherokee Freedmen card, but this is Grandpa Cooey's card. And note on the Freedmen cards, it says slave of. Nobody came in using AI or ChatGPT to put that field in there. It has been there the whole time. Okay? So you get basic information, right? It's in households. So let's say there's 3 or 4 generations in one household. You can have multiple people and you can find out the various slaveholders for those people. So Grandpa Cooey, it was very straightforward. He was on the 1896 roll, Cooey District. They have the page number. Then they talk about where he was, where his mother was on 1880, what her name was. Boom, we're good. He gets a Dawes roll number. But here's where by blood cards and Freedmen cards differ. Freedmen cards have 2 sides. By blood just has 1. When you flip to the back side of a Freedmen card, you get the name of the parents as well as their slaveholders. Again, this is not AI putting this in there. All these are at the National Archives. The originals are at the National Archives at Fort Worth. But this is a scan from Ancestry. And you see, we've got Ike Rogers as the father. He's dead. We find out later why. And then his slaveholder was Elzira Price May, and his mother was Sally Van. So it turns out that Ike is my great-great-grandfather. That's my connection to him. Sheila's a generation ahead of me. He's her great-grandfather. Okay? Now, this is Grandpa Cooey's Dawes application, okay? Because once you get the card, people think the card is everything, or they might find the final list and think the final list is everything. No, it's not. You get to hear directly from these people. And oftentimes, when you are doing research on African American families, you rarely get to hear the voice of those photos, those people. It's what they reported to somebody else. But when he was interviewed in Vinita on May 17th, 1901, and we have the luxury that these were typed. Thank God for technology, that by the time they did the Dawes Commission, it was typed. But they say, what's your name? Cooey Van Rogers. How old are you? About 20. Where do you live? Where's your post office, actually? Cootie's Bluff. Which district do you live in? Cooey. Who is it that you want to have enrolled? Just myself. How long have you lived in Cherokee Nation? All my life. Give me the name of your father, Isaac Rogers. Is he dead? Yes, sir. Give me the name of your mother, Sally Van. Is she dead? Yes, sir. How long has your father been dead? Ever since the Hayden payment. What happened at the Hayden payment? You see, come on, y'all, extract the data. We know his post office, how old he was, his parents' names, the fact that he's never left the Cherokee Nation. All of that is in this one little baby paragraph. And then he also mentioned, they asked how long his mother died. His mother's been dead ever since I was a baby. I don't remember her. I just told you all that I was lucky to have my grandmother until she was in her 70s, but my grandmother was orphaned by the time she was 17 years old. Both of her parents had died, and not only that, but her father's mother had passed away too before he even knew who she was. So, by the time we go through the Dawes applications, we end up with 8 kids, y'all. Yes, we do, okay? And y'all, Ike is fine. We can say that he was good looking. He was good looking. I heard reports that after he got mustered out, he would show up to the dances in his uniform. He knew exactly what he was doing. So, First two kids are by Caroline James. That's Aunt Florence and Uncle Luther. Then he had Uncle Eddie by Alice Banks. Then he has Uncle Nelson and Grandpa Cooey by Sarah Van. Sarah Van drops dead. Then he marries Aunt Ruth. Aunt Ruth drops dead. Then he marries Sarah Fry, where he has Aunt Ethel, Uncle Ray, and Uncle Roy. Now, there are still some question marks in the Dawes files. I'm not altogether sure. I'm hoping that DNA is gonna make that do a little something, but we'll see. So we end up with 8 children. I come from number 5. My cousin that's in the room comes from number 8. And doesn't her face look exactly like his? She looks just like him. She looks just like him. All right. So if you go to the Animature Center in Vinita, you'll actually see this in the permanent exhibit. I was so excited to see this photo. And one of the reasons why they told me they liked it was because it has a postmark with Vinita on it in the corner. So that's Grandma Clara, that's Uncle Cooey, Grandpa Cooey's wife, and that's Aunt Ethel. And I started going through more records. What did I find? Well, I knew and I learned that a sizable number of Cherokee Freedmen ended up in the state of Kansas, okay? And that was as a result of what happened in the Civil War, right? We had skirmishes, the whole country, the US was in chaos, we were in chaos too, and people went up into Kansas. And what that meant was that because we were in Kansas, we not only had our federal stuff, we also had state stuff. And Kansas is a state that has a state census. You know how we just did the federal census in 2020? Well, back in the day, states would do them on the 5s as opposed to the 10s. So if your folks went up into Kansas, you will have a state census at a time, especially in 1865, when, again, slavery is just ending. And there were other roles, right? We also had the 1880, 1890, 93, 96. We have Freedmen-specific roles like the Wallace roll and the Kern-Clifton roll. Do y'all see how many censuses we have in just this one area? The average person just has federal. But if your people went into Kansas, you've got that. If your folks stayed in the nation, you have rolls. All these are different censuses, you all. When some people, again, just have just a few. Now, I went to DC in September, and the Wallace Roll records, the affidavits, the applications that go to that roll, they also tell you who people's slaveholders were. This is Ike Rogers' Wallace Roll application. And if you notice, it says, I was a slave at the breaking out of the war. My master's name was Peter May. You say, well, wait a minute. The Dawes card said Elzira. Peter was Elzira's husband. Remember, I mean, granted, women's rights aren't all what they should be right now, but back then it wasn't so good. So even if it was your property, your husband, come on now, girl, you over here talking to me in the front row. Right? You my hype lady. You're going to be like, what's the lady from Apollo used to get up? No, not Kiki Shepard, but there was a lady with a jerry curl. If you watch see, this is how I know y'all was watching Apollo on television. She used to sit right center, and it didn't matter if the person was horrible at amateur night. She would always get up and clap. I got to figure out what her name is. I'm gonna have to go. You're gonna be her for me today. So they mentioned the master's name. I was in the Cherokee Nation at the breaking out of the war. I obtained my freedom at the close of the war. I was in the U.S. Army. Yes, claim it, right? And then he talked about when he returned to the nation. And then this paragraph, which I could even get to, lists out all the kids' names. So even if I hadn't found them through the various Dawes files, I could have found them in this application. So this is where we get to the part of the story that he's a black U.S. Marshal. Anybody in this room ever heard of Bass Reeves? Yes. Yes. Okay, the sun rises and sets for Bass Reeves, okay? But people forget there were other black marshals, like Ike Rogers, like Rufus Cannon, okay? Give my granddaddy his credits, okay? And so what you're looking at is, if you go to the National Archives, you can actually pull scans of their oaths of office. So this is the first oath of office that Ike took as a U.S. Deputy Marshal to serve Judge Isaac Parker in Fort Smith. That meant that he was riding through the Indian Territory, issuing arrest warrants and arresting people and delivering them to Fort Smith, Arkansas. by horseback. And we learned yesterday they pay sucked. What was it, $2? My last $2, yes, okay? We were in there, I was like, God, what for the jukebox? Like, that's literally, I was thinking about Johnny Taylor when he said $2. I was like, wow. But they did give mileage, okay, on a horse, right? So if you guys are doing work and people are not reimbursing your mileage, tell them that they were paying for mileage back then, okay? So some of the accounts of what happened during his service as U.S. Marshal were absolutely like nuts, okay? So in this one, they're talking about the actual U.S. Marshal Yo's, that he on Friday got a telegram from Isaac Rogers and Rufus Cannon, these are black marshals. Again, Ike rode with Bass Reeves, but you hear about Bass Reeves, you don't hear about Ike Rogers, okay? And matter of fact, if we're just gonna call the thing a thing, yeah. All right. Bass wouldn't even hear that long. He was not in this area that long. They sent him out west. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't come in there. We looked at a payment roll yesterday. That man made $500 in 6 months. He was doing decapturing, okay? But he wasn't in this area that long. But I don't know. I mean, again, somebody send me receipts. Ike survived 200 shots fired when he tried to capture Henry Starr and Ed Newcomb. That's what he wired back to the marshal. Then here goes another thing where the Wharton train robbery gang, he's saying basically, early last Thursday, Ike with 4 of the officers surrounded a log house in Sand Creek in the Osage Nation, in which there were 11 men in the house. How do you survive 200 shots? I mean, Tupac didn't survive 5. I mean, well, actually he did the first time. Right, because I'm hearing America's Most Wanted. Like, man, what the hell, live with 5 shots? He did survive that. It was the second time that he did not. Either way, Ike ends up losing his commission as a U.S. Deputy Marshal. But what I learned yesterday, and this is why you should always take research trips, is that there are additional documents from Fort Smith that prove that he got his commission beyond the time of just being the person who captured Cherokee Bill. Because if you read all the books, it says, oh, he lost his commission and they gave him one back to capture Cherokee Bill. I found a document yesterday that said that he came and apprehended somebody in 1896. So again, run me the receipts because I know what my granddaddy did. But Ike is a complicated man. And he loses his commission, and I believe people speculate as to why, but I think it was because a man, and I'm probably going to butcher your name, I'm sorry, Mr. Charles Tonganoxie was arrested, and he claimed that Ike told him that if he just gave him a little something, that he could get him out of his charge. And they charged him with extortion in the same court that he used to deliver people to. And this happens in 1894. So, you ever seen this movie?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, there's a lot of head shaking in the room, virtual crowd. Now, of course, all the women in the room are not going to be upset the fact that Jonathan Majors and Idris Elba and Lakeith Stanfield are all in one movie. Right, we're not. But just imagine when my family heard this movie was coming out, okay? And I will name drop slightly because I was on an episode of Who Do You Think You Are with Regina King, and she is an absolutely incredible person. But when the movie was coming out and we heard Cherokee Bill gonna be in the movie, we were like, yes! Ike is gonna be on the screen, everybody's gonna know how awesome he is, and then just imagine when the movie happens and Lakeith goes into the middle of the town square and he bleeds out. And we were like, where's the capture? Where's the hanging? We were like, oh, no. We all were so mad. And so I was like, oh my gosh. I was complaining. I was like, that's okay. That gives us an opportunity to say what happened, right? So let's come back to this picture. And normally I read what the National Parks Service says, but today I'm going to read Ike's account of what took place on April 21st of 1897. And the reason why I'm going to read Ike's account is because last night when we were in our hotel room, we always go back over this story a million times. there are always aspects of it that we forget, or just, you know, sometimes you have to read things a few times in order for stuff to come out. So when we get to this point, again, Cherokee Bill is cutting up, okay? He's robbing trains, he's murdering people, including his own brother-in-law, okay? And they were really trying to get rid of him, right? Like, dude, just, again, Judge Parker is hanging people actively. He's sending people to the gallows. And while sort of not being a proponent of executions, which that's an interesting scenario. So they hatch a plan to utilize Ike. Now, at this point, they say that Ike would harbor fugitives. I'm not saying he didn't, because I wasn't there. But he was definitely familiar with Cherokee Bill. They knew each other. And one day, there was a young lady that Bill liked named Maggie Glass. Reports say that she was a cousin. I've never found proof that this young lady was related to us at all. So I don't know who passed that, who got the telephone and added that part on. I don't know how that happened. But it was her birthday. They decided to try to lure Bill over to the house because they knew that he liked her. So Ike sends one of his boys out to get Bill when he notices he's in the neighborhood. We don't know which boy this is because he had at least 4 or 5 sons living at home, okay? So it could have been Cooey, it could have been a number. We know it was not Uncle Roy because his wife was pregnant with him, okay? So we know it wasn't Uncle Roy that was sent out. So they send out the little boy, and Bill comes over, they have the party, Grandma Sarah cooks supper, 7 months pregnant, okay? I'm gonna keep bringing it back to her because everybody does not know her role in this story. They go back to all these men, but they forget the women had to support some of this stuff in order for it to happen. So she cooks supper, they decide they're gonna go to sleep. Now I'm like, Bill, you really should have left, okay? You know they're trying to capture you, but you playing along. Ike and Bill end up sleeping in the same bed. And every time Ike moves, Bill moves because he's like, he's gonna try to capture me. Ike tries to poison him with morphine that he poured in some whiskey. He wouldn't drink it, okay? They play cards. They stay up till 4 in the morning talking. Oh boy. So this is when I also have to put in here, again, next to 7 months pregnant, Sarah Fry Rogers. Clint Scales, the neighbor, who is number 2, he also comes over because he's a part of the plot. And this is Ike's account. I've been instructed by Colonel Clump to take him alive if possible. I did not want to kill him if I could help it, but I made up in my mind to kill him if I could not take him any other way. Clint Scales and I had our guns hidden where we could get them in a hurry. We did not want to give him any show of fight. After breakfast, 7 months pregnant, cooked the supper, and she cooked breakfast. Now, mind you, there are 9 people in their house at this point, okay? He sent Maggie to go buy some chickens. He sent the boys off someplace, right? So based on what we could surmise, Sarah, 7 months pregnant with Uncle Roy, her grandfather, okay? And Aunt Ethel were the only ones potentially in the house besides Clint Scales and Ike Rogers and Cherokee Bill. And so he said, after breakfast, we talked along some time. He began to talk about leaving. He and Scales and I were sitting at the open fireplace. So just imagine the fireplace is up here. Y'all got good sanctified imagination. Just imagine the fireplace is right here. And I knew that we had to make a break on him pretty soon, and I was afraid the girl would take a hand in it when the trouble began, so I gave her $1 to buy some chickens at a neighbor's house so as to get her out of the way. I also sent my boys away as I had not told them my plan, so he didn't even tell Grandpa Coo and them what he was doing. But Grandma Sarah knew. Bill finally took a notion that he wanted to take a smoke. So he took some paper and some tobacco from his pocket, rolled up a cigarette. He didn't even have a match, so he stooped over in front of the fireplace, to light it, turning his head from me in an instant. That was my chance, and I took it. We need to put that on a t-shirt. There was a fire stick lying on the floor near me. I grabbed it and struck him across the back of the head. I must have hit him hard enough to kill an ordinary man, but it only knocked him down. Scales and I then jumped on him. This totally sounds like people in my family jump on somebody. I jumped on him, but he let one yell and got to his feet. My wife grabbed Bill's Winchester, and we three tussled on the floor for 20 minutes. That's what I'm saying, because here's what I want folks to understand. Second trimester will kick your behind. You think the world is yours, and then you roll into them last months, and your energy is... The fact that she cooked 2 meals, had all them kids in that house, and grabbed a gun, give Sarah Fry Whitmire, right, Rogers Whitmire, her due. So she grabbed a gun. I'm seeing all of this, okay? And Ike said, I thought once I would have to kill him, but finally I got my handcuffs on him. He then pleaded and begged me to release him. And he promised money and horses, all I wanted. Then he cursed me out. That wasn't it, y'all. We put him on a wagon, and Scales rode with him while I rode on horseback and started to Nowata. On the way there, he broke out of the handcuffs, okay, and grabbed Clint Scales' gun. And Scales had to come out of the wagon to keep from losing his Winchester, right? And he kept him covered on a horse, and they delivered him in Wagner. Now, again, why did they choose that plot on The Harder They Fall? They had the story right there. Either way, Bill makes it to Fort Smith. While he is there, he manages to kill one of the guards. And by no irony, 127 years ago, yesterday, he was executed at Fort Smith. Now, the funny part for us is that we didn't realize that we coordinated this trip at the same time as Bill getting executed. So when we drove up, when we were literally in the Cushman golf cart at Fort Smith, the ranger says to us, well, you guys know what today is. And we're like, St. Patrick's Day? And he's like, no, Bill was executed today. In fact, in about 30 minutes. He knew the exact time. And we were like, how eerie is that? So we celebrated with beers later. But here's the thing. People don't realize, again, there are newspaper clippings. The other part about living in this area and having ancestors who were here, you guys, not only do we have tribal records, not only do we have federal records, we have state records, we have incredible newspapers, which were daily. So I'm telling y'all, best research in the country is in Oklahoma for Black folks, period. So in this news article, it says, a few nights ago, he attended a dance at Ike Rogers' house. They were more than familiar. They knew each other. They were friends, okay? And after Bill's capture and eventual execution, his family was feeling some type of way, okay? In particular, his younger brother, who was named Clarence. Now, remember I told you that my aunt's name was Clarence? I still haven't figured out why my great-grandparents named the little girl Clarence, but then that was also the same name of the man that would eventually kill their father-in-law / father. I don't know. But what happened was, if you recall in that application, right, for the Dawes Commission, where they asked Grandpa Cooey, how long has your father been dead? And he said, ever since the Hayden payment. Well, remember, we have these rolls and things because annuities were being issued out to our population, right? We have to sue the federal government because they're allowing intruders to come into the Cherokee Strip. That's our land, right? So then when the federal government issues us a payment, we have to divide that out amongst our citizens, okay? And that sort of thing would happen all the time. Rolls and things would happen all the time. And so there was a payment at Hayden, and Clarence Goldsby, who was Cherokee Bill's brother, showed up at the payment. Look, you know, he's 17. yeah, you killed my brother. And Ike was like, what? And young Crosby, they have it in the paper. You guys, literally, it's the Facebook of the day, okay? It is. Young Crosby was at Hayden and met Rogers, and they had some unpleasant words, during which it is said Rogers slapped him up and abused him generally. Now, I am not going to say that I did not slap the boy up. I will never claim that. But they got into a dispute. Several people have accounted this. And Crosby told Rogers that at the time that he had the best of him because he didn't have a gun. But that the day Rogers set foot in Fort Gibson, he would kill him. He said that. And Rogers didn't believe him. So when there was a payment happening at Fort Gibson on April 20th, 1897, a day shy of that baby who was ruminating in that womb, when that gun was wrestled out of the hands of Cherokee Bill, a day before that baby turned a year old, his father was murdered in broad daylight at Fort Gibson. We took a trip there. It was ominous. They had burned whatever they were burning. I don't know what you guys are burning, but that smoke that was in the air a few days ago, they were burning. So it was smoky, and the sky was cloudy, and there was a wind chime that was playing this ominous sort of sound. And we just walked around, and it was like, this is where it happened. This is where our family got entirely destabilized, to the point where me and Sheila don't even meet until about 12 years ago, because I posted a message on a website looking for information about Ike Rogers. So Ike eventually dies. We don't know how many times he was shot because it was so sensational, because it was broad daylight. Some accounts say 5 times, some say 7 times, some say 9 times. They talk about the women hollering, and Sarah sending him a telegram, don't take your tail down there. He did it anyway. But he died. And I believe our family were the only ones that knew where he was buried. So I've made it my business to request from the Veterans Affairs a headstone for him, because he gets one as a Civil War veteran. So we are in the process of working on that. Now, here's another part about the story that few people know about. Because when you're researching Vinita and Nowata, I had to start a whole family tree for all those people, because it was too many folks with the same name, okay? But what I learned is that in the days leading up to Bill's capture, Sarah Vann, my great-great-grandmother, who was married to Ike Rogers, her brother-in-law actually shot and killed a man named Wash Nave because he thought he was Cherokee Bill. So everybody was scared at this time period. But unless you know the families and you know the family history, you don't even know this is the same family. You were all spooked that this guy was coming. Now, this isn't the end of Ike's story. I told you guys he was a handful. During the many times that we've come into conflict around the rights of freedmen, Ike was a voice amongst the crowd. He was writing letters to the editor advocating on behalf of freedmen well before 2017. See, our status and our position in the nation has been precarious since the treaty, you all. People like to reduce it down to just this isolated time span, but no, it was much earlier than that. And here he is, grandstanding in the Indian chieftain of Vinita to the freedmen in answer to the attorneys, okay? He said, I'm gonna be the voice. My favorite part of this whole little letter is, and when your lawyers tell you to go ahead with a lawsuit rather than to compromise, you can put it in your pipe and smoke it. That was in 1895. I said, okay. He also testified in front of a Senate subcommittee hearing that was looking at the treatment of freedmen in the 5 tribes. And he talked about his kids not being able to go to the schools, but he was able to vote. In addition to that, this is my favorite letter to the editor that Ike wrote, where he's laying out, again, the treaty rights. What does the treaty say? What are we supposed to have as freedmen as a part of the treaty? He says, to close this out, if I have all the rights of a native Cherokee, surely my daughter would have the same rights as your daughter would. You talk about adoption. We are not of that class of people. We never came here from Kansas, Missouri, or Texas to be adopted into this nation. We were born here. This is our birthplace. And I think it will be a hard matter for the Cherokees to adopt one of their own family. And then this is when he gets up there tap dancing on some nerves. And I even know people, when they hear me read this, they're probably going to be like, ah! But I'm going to read it. 2/3 of the Negroes of this tribe are mixed with Indian blood and will be called Indians when proven up.
All right now. Right there.
This is an incredible man. So what do we do going forward? Well, of course, I'm her doppelganger in the middle. I know that. We all have her face. But this is Grandma Clara. This was, of course, in Kansas City. We're going further. We're using DNA now. And I'm not talking about percentages. Everybody loves your little sexy pie chart with your Irish or your so-and-so. Nah, because one of the biggest questions we've had is, who is Ike's father? We know who his mother is. We know who his grandmother is. That's great to have, especially because we're matrilineal people, but who is his father? And using more record sets, like the Eastern Cherokee applications, those are even better because they have 3 and 4 generations of family history. I keep telling y'all, you missing out. We have the best research, okay? And so that leads to the forced removal and a woman named Little Nan. That's among the records of the Eastern Cherokee applications with the ancestors of people who have DNA tested and are DNA matches to our family. In addition, my cousin in Kansas City, I love you, Joni, but she trusts the U.S. Postal Service more than I would. She keeps sending me ephemera. And she sent me this typed out family history from Aunt Edna, where Aunt Edna is throwing shade at people wanting to research genealogy because they watched Roots. Ever since Haley's book, Roots, or my folks would say Roots, on the TV special with the same story won such national renown, it is reported that more people than ever are searching for their heritage. It's a fad out here in LA. The libraries have huge books and directions on how to search. Our family roots wouldn't be too hard. On my father's side, it's all Cherokee Indian. He was a Will Rogers family. Hold the door. We ain't heard that yet. Okay. Papa's grandfather and Will Rogers' fathers were full brothers. Okay, wait a minute, Aunt Edna, what are you saying? I'm sure Wilbert has told you all of this. He never did, but okay. He traveled the Trail of Tears from Georgia to Oklahoma. It's in history when our government by force moved the Cherokees and many tribes from their homeland to faraway Oklahoma. Papa's mother couldn't speak English, hair to her heels. There we go with the Cherokee hallmarks. Papa's mother's maiden name was Van, her name was Sally. What I will say is a lot of the people that she's talking about in this, that she didn't have names, I've been able to find the names of the people. And I'm still trying to substantiate this claim with Will Rogers. But what has emerged is that this lady here, if you go through the exhibit, she's actually on the wall back there. Her name is Agnes Rogers Walker. And she was interviewed by the Oklahoma, as a part of the Oklahoma Pioneer Papers. And these are interviews that took place in the 30s. They're very similar to the slave narratives, but they're specific to Oklahoma. There are a bunch of freedmen who have interviews, and they're talking about times during slavery. And so she comes out and says, I knew Cherokee Bill, one of the most desperate outlaws in Indian Territory. And later she says, my cousin, Ike Rogers, was a U.S. Deputy Marshal. How is this your cousin? So I went on a hike, records-wise, and I discovered her uncle, who was named Rab Rogers. And Rab was a veteran of the Indian Home Guard. He was also in the Civil War. He had an Eastern Cherokee application. Now you guys are like, what is that? This is to compensate people for the money and resources they expended during the forced removal. There were several freedmen that applied for these and got rejected. Just because they got rejected does not mean these documents don't have rich information about our ancestors. So you see where he's living, and I know I'm going to say around Ulaga. Oh, I was close. Ulaga, got it. So he writes in his age. When you get to the next page, name all your brothers and sisters and their birth years. Name your grandparents. Again, there are places, and I love the look on your face. I can't wait for you to start reading through these. But he lists a woman named Little Nan, and based on DNA with the descendants of Charles Rab Rogers and Houston Rogers, who were two men who were enslaved by Clement Van Rogers, the Clement Van Rogers, as in Will Rogers' father, we share DNA with their descendants. So we are cousins with Agnes. We're trying to figure out which one of the brothers, because it's not Houston, it's not Rab, it's another one. There's another one named Nick, like my name without the A on it, who was murdered in Kansas. He potentially could be Ike's father. And of course, those are the two familiar faces. If you're in Cherokee Nation, you know exactly who they are. So, going from me back to all the generations, again, this is without federal records, like in terms of census records, until 1907. I'm actually able to trace back earlier than I am on any other branch of my family here in the Cherokee Nation, and the majority of you who are freedmen can do the exact same thing. Okay? Now, let's go someplace for a second, because again, when we talk about DNA, we're not talking about percentages. Anybody follow Maury? You know the show Maury? The two people come on. They do that sensational story. No, I'm not the dad, and blah, blah, blah. I know what I did. You know, it's like, so you can just, people who are in TV, you know, like we know the formula, like, because it's the same the whole time, but people tune in. It's hilarious because my dad used to love shows like that. Oh my gosh, it just dawned on me, he loved Jerry Springer. He used to call me and be like, you got to watch the one with this. I'm like, Dad, the same episode is not airing here. But anyway, if we believe Maury, right? If we believe in DNA testing, if we know that me and you DNA test, compare our DNA together and give us a degree of relatedness. So if you're my sister, it's going to tell you you're my sister. If you're my first cousin, it's going to tell you you're my first cousin, right? That's how you use DNA. And there's a misconception that Cherokee people are not DNA testing, and that's not true. In fact, there are a lot of Cherokee people who are DNA testing. They just don't know they can apply for citizenship because they haven't found the proof to do it. I know how to find it. The minute I see Vinita and Nowata on the tree, I'm like, there you go, it's my arm, right? As opposed to my two Louisiana legs and my Arkansas other arm. But what happens is that, going back to that 2/3 of the Negroes having Indian blood, if you notice, there was something that was not on the Freedmen Dawes cards, and that was blood quantum, right? 1/4, 1/32nd, what, you know, then when you get on the 1900 census, it gets real cockamamie on that one. But we were never documented with our Indian blood. A lot of times people would say it during the Dawes interviews, but it wouldn't be captured on Dawes cards. And so there are a lot of us who are walking around with oral history around people who are by blood as relatives, and we know that. And what is happening is, as a result of us testing on commercially available DNA tests, we are seeing who those people are. And this is not percentages, because some people think, I gotta show 25% indigenous ancestry in order for me to get my card. No, we're talking familial. First cousins, second cousins, third cousins. And what has emerged in our family has validated oral history about Ike's grandmother being assaulted soon after the removal by a well-known man. Because what I haven't heard you guys ask me is, how in the heck are you guys Rogers? Because the women are Richardsons and Mays. Where is Rogers coming from? Did it come from the dad? We've got DNA connected to a father. We have more than 55 DNA matches that are descendants of old settler chief John Rogers. 55. 55. That's not 5, that's not 10, 55. I've counted them. How do you do that? We have a wide smattering of descendants of Ike DNA tested, where I may show up for one person, another will have someone else. It'll be a group of 3 of us here and another group of 3 of us there. So as we continue the work of repairing some of the harm and things that were said and things that were done, we have to reckon with this part of our history too. And know that when we say things like the freedmen were just slaves of the Cherokee Nation, that's not what my matching is telling me. That's not what we're seeing, okay? And those of you who descend from Bible people, whether you identify as black or white, you might find some black freedmen in your matches. Reach out to them, connect with them. You might have information that they don't have. And that's the same policy that we should be doing outside the nation as well. So, with that unfortunate scenario, that actually takes Ike's mother's side back to some early Cherokee names. If you've ever looked at Emmett Starr's seminal book on Cherokee Nation genealogy, it goes back to Ludovic Grant, and I'm going to mess up Miss Tassel's name, but you know what, that's all right. She knows my heart. Okay? So we continue working through. We do things like go and visit Ike's mother's grave in Fort Smith, Arkansas. That's the first time I ever met Sheila in person. This is our 3rd trip together. Yes, we love to go and travel and do things. In addition to meeting family members and corralling, we're noticing we all look alike. And just by scanning and posting pictures online, on my tree on Ancestry, my cousin Joanna, who was Aunt Ethel's daughter, got to see a picture of her great-grandmother for the first time. So if you've got pictures, scan them, upload them, make them publicly available so that your folks can see what their ancestors look like. And then we get to this day where I was told to hold on to my documents for a long time, and then I was told, send it in. And I held my breath because I was like, if I get rejected, I'm going to be so mad. But the day happened, and 4 years ago, this week, I got my citizenship. All right. I literally ran around my house. Because I was like, I'm not waiting. I'm not going to wait for it. You know, you just like, it's like, you know, waiting for the Red Ryder BB gun, you know, for the secret, little Annie, Orphan Annie's secret decoder pin to come in the mailbox. I just stopped looking, and my husband went and got the mail, and he goes, oh, you have this blue thing from the Cherokee Nation. And I was like, what? And I was like, ah! I was running around the house. I was the first person in our family to get our citizenship in over 100 years, you all. And since then, I came down, I literally drove to Kentucky to go and get my photo ID, and I met Chuck, met Principal Chief, and it was the weekend of my 40th birthday, literally almost to the day. And so since then, we've been able to get 15 family members enrolled. So I've just been working on that. We also were featured in the History Channel campaign with Ike Rogers. That was great. We'll skip through that. And we showed up here in September for the opening of the exhibit. And there's little Sebastian, who's the 5th great-grandson of Ike Rogers. So, there any questions? That's it.
Good job.
Questions, queries, conundrums? We're going to take a break in between this presentation and the next one. Ooh, look at my Oseo water. No questions? You guys are like little church mice. All right. Look, she's got her pen out. She's ready to go. Okay. You want to ask me a question? What's up?
I saw the name Van and Road.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's in my parents' papers.
Right.
I'm not sure how.
Right. I have a whole tree of Vinita and Nowata people. So even if it's not the same folks, I could probably tell you. When we were in here for the opening last year, I literally had my phone out like this. Okay, so that's so-and-so's Wesley van. This is right. Because there's a lot of people, especially in Vinita and Nowata, it's the mud, as I call it. It's good mud.